Namaskar, friends. Welcome to my Dharma Talk, my Sunday Dharma Talk here on my channel on YouTube. Today we will be presenting the final two talks of my introductory series on Buddha Dharma entitled Fundamental View. It should take approximately 1 hour. And the first talk is entitled The Cultivation of Wisdom, which is the ninth talk of 10 in the series. In previous talks, we discussed the importance of wisdom in the spiritual quest. However, what kind of wisdom is this? The Buddha compares wisdom to the lights of the moon, sun, and fire. He declares the light of wisdom to be greater than these. In a remarkable simile, in a sermon presented not to monks but to nuns, the Buddha compares the supermundane wisdom of the teaching to a butcher's knife, quote, that cuts, severs, and carves away the inner defilements, fetters, and bonds, just as the butcher cuts, severs, and carves away the inner tendons, sinews, and ligaments of a cow, quote unquote. This striking simile is remarkable in the context of the universal Indian veneration for the cow and the quasi-tradition of Buddhist vegetarianism. I say quasi because the Buddha never made vegetarianism mandatory. The Indian reverence for the cow must be very ancient. The Rig Veda says, quote, the fiend who consumes flesh of cattle with flesh of horses and of human bodies, who slaughters the milk-producing cow, O Agni, tear off the heads of such with fiery fury, quote unquote. Nevertheless, the ancient Brahmins also sacrificed cows and ate their meat in a ritual context. The Buddha's words must have struck the ears of his listeners as a powerful and even offensive metaphor. Perhaps he designed to offend the Brahmins, to shake them up, who the Buddha criticized openly, often, and severely. The Buddha may also have been calling attention to the sacred context of this ritual slaughter, not unlike the Western notion of Eucharist. Perfect view. The Buddha identifies 8 conditions for developing true wisdom. These conditions include an attitude of reverence toward a teacher. The teacher may include a fellow monk, another indication of the Buddha's egalitarianism. Also included are receiving teachings from a teacher, physical and mental withdrawal, ethical self restraint, investigating and penetrating the teachings, effort directed toward abandoning the unwholesome and cultivating the wholesome, not engaging in rambling and pointless talk, either talking about the teaching or keeping silent, and deeply realizing the truth of change. When asked, what is perfect view, synonymous with the realization of wisdom, Sariputta, renowned as the Arhant foremost in wisdom, identifies 16 realizations. These realizations constitute perfect view, namely, understanding the root of the wholesome and the unwholesome, the 4 nutriments, so called, which include food, contact, volition, and consciousness, the truth of suffering, aging and death, birth, existence, attachment, desire, feeling, contact, the 6 senses, name and form, consciousness, volitional formations, ignorance, and the taints, consisting of sensuality, existence, and ignorance. These realizations lead to the realization of the Eightfold Path. 12 of these, starting with aging and death and ending with ignorance, correspond to the 12 links in the chain of cause and effect. These include 3 of the 4 nutriments. The 5 aggregates. The Buddha says that his enlightenment arose out of a state of direct knowledge or gnosis based on the realization of the 5 aggregates. The chain of cause and effect, the general principle of interconnectedness, resolves itself into 12 links. The links consist of ignorance, volitional formations, consciousness, mind and matter, name and form, the 6 senses, contact, feeling, desire, attachment, becoming, birth, and aging and dying. The five aggregates are a subset of this list. They consist of volitional formations, consciousness, form, perception, contact feeling, and attachment. The latter is applied to the previous five, all rooted in desire. Thus, the five aggregates constitute a subset of the links, but in a different order. Perhaps the aggregates preceded the links, as an early version of the latter. One must understand all of these factors in dynamic process terms rather than as objective elements or things. It is hard to convey this concept in English due to the linguistic distinction between verbs or actions and nouns or things. The closest one can come in English is the use of the process participle, indicated by the suffix ing. Although presented in linear order, the doctrine of interconnectedness connects all the links. Therefore, they are not truly linear. The links are all aspects of one singular, aggregate, and universal process, all aspects of which condition and connect to each other. The Buddha compares this to a hairball. Thus, they are ultimately inseparable. The Buddha states that the five aggregates are rooted in desire, the craving that constitutes the eighth link of the twelvefold chain of cause and effect. He emphasizes, through desire or intention, that one can profoundly influence the state of one's future rebirths. The idea of self arises from attachment to the five aggregates. Non attachment to the five aggregates, based on the realization of their essential nature, results in non identification with them. In this way, the realization of not self, the third characteristic of existence, arises. Another basis for the arising of the realization of not self is the inability to control form. If form were self, then form would be amenable to change based on volition. However, this is not the case. So for the remaining aggregates. In other words, one experiences oneself as subject to the five aggregates. The fact that the aggregates are not subject to volition proves that the five aggregates are not a self. A further subset of the five aggregates includes I, form, I consciousness, eye contact, and so for the remaining senses. The senses, the sensations, and the sensed altogether constitute the all. Feeling, perception, and cause effect are the essential core set. The Buddha says that one cannot overcome suffering without detachment from and renunciation of the all. In a famous simile, the Buddha says that the all is burning with lust, hatred, delusion, birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and despair. Detachment liberates the mind and destroys rebirth. One has lived the spiritual life. There are no more rebirths through liberation from the taints by non attachment. Detachment is the result of realizing the essential truth of change. In this way, one sees that the immediate causes of liberation are ultimately reducible to the realization of wisdom or insight, that is, the realization or recognition of the true nature of beings. Ananda declares the world empty. The Mahayana further developed the ontological realization of emptiness, culminating in Dzogchen. The Buddha affirms Ananda's insight. He declares that the world, consciousness, and the rest are empty of self. Nothing worldly is or can be self. Samsara. The Buddha compares form to a bubble, a mirage, the coil of a banana tree, or to a magical illusion. The Buddha refers to the magician who creates the illusion of the world as doing so at a crossroads. The shamanic practice of meeting at a crossroads is a universal archetype. In India, the god Bhairava, a wrathful form of Shiva, guards the crossroads outside villages. Stone phalluses and statues of Bhairava's watchful eyes represent him as a guardian of the boundaries. The Buddha recognizes form as inherently void, hollow, and insubstantial. It is remarkable that quantum physics explains the underlying subatomic structure of matter as a quantum froth. It is as though one were to investigate the intricate structures of the froth of a wave breaking upon the shore. It exists for an instant and then is gone. However, if one looks at it closely and quickly enough, it contains worlds within worlds. Through this understanding, one is liberated. We have referred to the world, the cycles of change, commonly translated as existence, as a mirage. The Theravadin claim that the Buddha did not talk about the transdual, despite explicit references to duality and its transcendence all through the Pali Canon. The Buddha says of the world, quote, "This world, for the most part, depends upon a duality, upon the idea of existence, and upon the idea of non existence. But for one who sees the origin of the world as it really is, with correct wisdom, there is no idea of non existence with respect to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it is with correct wisdom, there is no idea of non existence with respect to the world. And for one who sees the cessation of the world as it really is with correct wisdom, there is no idea of existence in regard to the world. All exists. This is one extreme. All does not exist. This is the second extreme. Without veering toward either of these extremes, the Tathagata teaches the Dhamma by the middle." Similarly, in the Udana, the Buddha says, quote, "There is, bhikkhus, that base where there is no earth, no water, no fire, no air, no base consisting of the infinity of space, no base consisting of the infinity of consciousness, no base consisting of nothingness, no base consisting of neither perception nor non-perception, neither this world nor another world or both, neither sun nor moon. Here, bhikkhus, I say there is no coming, no going, no staying, no deceasing, no uprising, not fixed, not movable, it has no support. Just this is the end of suffering." Quote unquote. Compare, quote, "Here, here, Bahiya, you should train yourself thus. In the seen will be merely what is seen. In the heard will be merely what is heard. In the sensed will be merely what is sensed. In the cognized will be merely what is cognized. In this way you should train yourself, Bahiya. When, Bahiya, for you what is seen is merely what is seen, and the cognized is merely what is cognized, then, Bahiya, you will not be with that. When, Bahiya, you are not with that, then, Bahiya, you will not be in that. When, Bahiya, you are not in that, then, Bahiya, you will be neither here nor beyond nor in between the two. Just this is the end of suffering." Quote unquote. These passages and others suggest that the Buddha taught non-duality. These passages imply the Mahayana doctrine of the two truths, relative and absolute. Therefore, to describe the world simply as illusory is oversimplified. Illusions do not simply not exist. Even if the world is illusory from the perspective of the absolute or reality itself, it is nevertheless experienced, and therefore in the sense in which it is experienced from the perspective of the relative. The Buddha's discussion of causality in the context of emancipation with residue confirms this view. I prefer the metaphor of a mirage, a metaphor that the Buddha also used, to that of an illusion. From the latter, one may infer, absurdly, that the world is not grounded in reality. It becomes appropriate to inquire into how the world comes about in the context of the absolute. That is, what is the ontological function of the world? The world must fulfill some function in relation to reality. The Buddha says in the face of the doctrine of change that the four truths are actual, unerring, and invariable. However, the doctrine of change itself is relative. The absolute truth of the world is also relative from the perspective of the absolute, since the experience of emancipation transcends suffering. The Nirvāṇa element. The Buddha refers to emancipation as the non-disintegrating, the non-manifest, the non-proliferated, the deathless, and the non-conditioned. He explicitly alludes to the ontological character of emancipation as absolute reality. The Buddha says, quote, "There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If, monks, there were no unborn, no unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, no escape would be discerned from what is born, become, made, conditioned. But because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, therefore an escape is discerned from what is born, become, made, conditioned." Quote unquote. People think of emancipation as singular. I have alluded to the view of Han that there are two emancipations, one imperfect, one perfect. I have also referred to the emancipation of the Buddha's enlightenment and the emancipation associated with the Buddha's passing. The Buddha himself identifies two emancipations, one with residue and one without. The residue referred to is karma. One inherits causal residue from the past. Therefore, it does not seem from that the realization of emancipation necessarily destroys all past cause effects. The Arhant who has attained emancipation with residue still experiences pleasure and pain. Final knowledge upon his passing completely liberates the Arhant without residue. Presumably, an Arhant who attains emancipation with no causal residue will die immediately upon his awakening. Arhantship is a state of perfect liberation and transcendence in which there is no experience of pleasure and pain. A bodhisattva, then, at least potentially, is an Arhant with residue, the residue in this case being the karma of loving kindness. Karma. The common view of moral causality is that causality is the product of action. However, this is simplistic. It is more like the Jain than the Buddhist view. The Buddha says, quote, "What one intends and what one plans and whatever one has a tendency toward, this becomes a basis for the continuance of consciousness. But when one does not intend and does not plan and does not have a tendency toward anything, no basis exists for the continuation of consciousness." Quote unquote. Non-intentionality is the true meaning of Buddhist detachment. Similarly, Jesus said, "You shall not be concerned about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be concerned for itself." Quote unquote. Intention and not action is the essential causal factor. Once one realizes this fully, one realizes that all rules, all observances, all social and ethical norms, all beliefs, all rituals, and all practices are mere skillful means, or upaya. Skillful means are not at all like the imperious absolutes that have been the bane of so many religions, Buddhism included. However, this does not mean that one becomes passive. Rather, undertake any actions without attachment which and are therefore non-intentional, not unlike the teachings of Lao Tse. The evidence for this is the life of the Buddha himself. The universal view. Some might think that the Buddha taught the entirety of the spiritual life. Therefore, there is nothing concerning the spiritual life that he did not teach. However, the Buddha, as the most recent Buddha, was also the shortest lived. He taught during the most degenerate age, when the lifespan of human beings is only 120 years. They cite for this view the statement of the Buddha that he held nothing back, holding nothing in secret. However, the Buddha directly contradicts this notion when he says, quote, "The things that I have directly known but have not taught you are numerous, while the things I have taught you are few." Quote unquote. He compares the things that he has taught to a handful of leaves in relation to the leaves of the Samsapa tree. The Samsapa was probably rosewood, the leaves of which are very numerous. It is more correct to say that the Buddha taught what is fundamental or essential to the spiritual life. He did not teach it all. This is consistent with our view that the Buddha taught the perennial philosophy. The perennial or primordial philosophy comprises the totality of the spiritual life. In other words, the Buddha limited what he taught to the limitations of his students in this degenerate age. It follows, therefore, that the horizons of the spiritual life should open before one as one progresses, rather than being limited to what the Buddha did and said. The fundamentalist view limits the spiritual life and is therefore false. When the Buddha says that he avoids speculation, he is not saying that the subject matter of speculation is empty of meaning. Rather, the Tathagata has experienced the truth of it all. For this reason, he avoids speculation. In its totality, the teaching transcends the comprehension of his unenlightened audience, and still does. That completes the first talk for today. We will conclude with the second and last talk in the series momentarily. This 10th and final talk, A Fundamental View, is entitled The Phenomenology of the Path. The Buddha distinguished four fundamental degrees of spiritual attainment: stream entry, once returning, non returning, and arhantship. To these he added the practices leading to the realization of these fruits, a clear reference to moral causality and its effects. The stream is a metaphor the Buddha used for both the Eightfold Path and the world. The implication is that there is a relation or correlation between the four realizations and the 8 steps of the path. Nevertheless, the exact relationship is subtle. Stream entry is, as the word suggests, the attainment of the path itself. As such, it is the fundamental attainment. The stream enterer, or stream winner, is one who, having attained the path, has overcome the fetters of belief in the reality of a self, doubt, and attachment to rites and rituals. Expressed in positive terms, he has achieved selflessness, certainty, and non attachment to actions. This person has achieved the Dharma eye. The stream enterer has achieved a taste of emancipation that results in a decisive awakening. This realization is the breakthrough to the Dharma, quote unquote. This state is identical with the state of the disciple, the spiritual order, and the perfect view. A stream enterer cannot be reborn as an animal, ghost, or hell being. According to the tradition, a stream enterer will attain full, final, and complete enlightenment within no more than 7 rebirths. Concerning this attainment, the Buddha said, taking up a bit of soil under his fingernail, quote, "For a noble disciple, a person accomplished in view who has made the breakthrough, the suffering that has been destroyed and eliminated is more, while what remains is trifling. The latter does not amount to 100th part, or 1,000th part, or 100,000th part of the former mass of suffering that has been destroyed and eliminated, since there is a maximum of 7 more lives. Of such great benefit is the breakthrough to the Dharma. Of such great benefit is it to obtain the vision of the Dharma." Quote unquote. One may compare the term breakthrough with Padmasambhava's concept of the leap. It implies that the attainment of stream entry is a singular, momentary, even visionary experience. As we have already discussed, a stream enterer is not necessarily a monastic or even celibate. Therefore, the noble order is not identical with the monastic order, as pointed out by Dr. Peter Macefield, whose book, Divine Revelation in the Pali Canon, I strongly recommend. The 4 factors for attaining stream entry consist of associating with superior people, hearing the true teaching, clear awareness, and practicing the teaching. A stream enterer experiences an instantaneous transformation of being, an awakening characterized by directly knowing and seeing the truth. The second developmental attainment is that of once returner. In addition to the three fetters already mentioned, he has significantly but not completely weakened attachment and anger. As the name implies, the once returner will experience only one more human rebirth. He will either be reborn as a divine being or attain emancipation. He can also attain this stage without embracing celibacy. Thus, this stage is available to a householder. The third developmental attainment is that of non-returner. The non-returner has completely overcome all of the foregoing fetters. In addition to the previous attainments, he has achieved indifference to sensual pleasures and perfect benevolence or loving kindness. Non-returners are never reborn as human beings. They are reborn directly in one of the five pure abodes of the form world. From there, they attain full enlightenment. Therefore, neither a bodhisattva nor a future Buddha has ever achieved this stage, because had they done so, they could never be reborn as a human being. This is one more confirmation of the difference between a bodhisattva and an arhant. Because he completely overcomes the fetter of attachment, a non-returner must be celibate. Still, he is not necessarily a monastic. The discourses represent this stage as an ideal stage for the laity to aspire to. The attainment of the stage of non-returner is equivalent to the attainment of the first meditative attainment. Finally, the fourth developmental attainment is that of Arhant. The Arhant has overcome all the previous fetters plus five additional fetters, namely desire for rebirth in any state, the ego conceit, restlessness or agitation, and finally ignorance, the root of the chain of cause and effect. Thus, the Arhat adds complete detachment, selflessness, tranquility, and wisdom to the attainment of the previous stages. In the Mahayana classification, this is the equivalent to the eighth stage of a bodhisattva. According to tradition, a householder cannot remain in the state of arhantship. Either he will attain arhantship at death, or he will become a monastic immediately upon achieving arhantship, due to this complete loss of interest in the world. Strictly speaking, therefore, all arhants are monastics, at least after the fact. This is not true of the previous stages. Thus, the common identification of the noble order with monasticism represents a conceptual confusion. The Arhat has also perfected the five faculties of faith, energy, clear awareness, concentration, and wisdom. According to the Buddha, an Arhat is incapable of nine actions: killing, stealing, sex, lying, sensuality, and wrong actions based on desire, hatred, delusion, and fear. Even if powerful sensory experiences were to enter his range of perception, they will not perturb his mind at all. One can see there is a kind of correspondence between these four stages and the Eightfold Path. The stream enterer has attained perfect view. All the stages have attained some step of the path. However, beyond that, a simple one-to-one correspondence is hard to find. The 10 fetters have no direct correspondence with the Eightfold Path. However, the faculties of energy, clear awareness, and concentration, mastered by the Arhat, suggest the final three steps of the path, namely right effort, right awareness, and right concentration. Wisdom is the specific attainment of the first step of the path, namely right view, or in other words, the goal. And Arhat has perfected all these. The Buddha says these five faculties are implicit in all the stages, but to different degrees. In the outsider, or worldling, they are completely lacking. However, this begs the question of the nature of the attainment of the stream enterer, who has achieved perfect view, overcome doubt, and attained certainty in the truth of the teaching. Two stages that precede the stage of stream enterer consist of faith followers and dharma followers. The latter is higher than the former. Faith and Dharma followers are stages of intermediate development between an ordinary worldling and a stream winner, or stream enterer. They consist of ordinary faith in the Buddha and wisdom, respectively. The Buddha says that the faith follower will be reborn as a divine being in a spiritual world. Dharma followers will attain enlightenment after an unspecified number of rebirths. Both will attain stream entry in their current life. The wanderer Vachagota wonders whether the Buddha is the only one who has attained these states. The Buddha assures him that others in the community have also attained them. He includes both male and female monastics who have attained the highest stage of arhantship, celibate male and female lay followers who have attained the third stage of non-returning, and non-celibate male and female lay followers who have attained the first and second stages of stream entry and once returning. Thus, the Buddha clearly makes no fundamental distinction between the genders. However, he does say non-celibate practitioners cannot proceed beyond the second stage of once returning, for the very practical karmic reason that the non-celibate person still attaches to sensual desire and rebirth. Nevertheless, once returning is still a very advanced state of spiritual development. A bodhisattva, or future Buddha, cannot attain any of these states since they all imply non-rebirth as a human being at some point in the future. The Buddha says he has been reborn many times as a bodhisattva over countless eons. Thus, the path of the Arhant is not the only possible spiritual path, but only one possible path, namely the path taught by the Buddha in 5th century before the Common Era, northeast India. 7 kinds of person. According to another classification, the Buddha recognizes 7 kinds of persons: the two ways liberated person, the wisdom liberated person, the body witness, one who has attained to view, the faith liberated person, the Dharma follower, and the faith follower. We have already discussed the concepts of liberation by wisdom and faith, as well as the Dharma and faith followers. We have also discussed tranquility, literally quietude of the heart, meditation, and insight, literally intuition, meditation. The practice of tranquility meditation results in the pacification of the physical body by means of the 8 form and formless meditative attainments. The practice of insight meditation results in the pacification of the mental body through the destruction of the taints, namely sensuality, lust for living, and ignorance, and the detachment induced by deeply understanding the nature of existence, especially change. Now this structure has been set up, one can see how these 7 types of person fit in. As the name implies, one liberated both ways has mastered both quietude and insight. The one liberated by wisdom has not mastered quietude, but he has mastered insight. Both types of practice are, the Buddha says, sufficient to attain arhantship. Nothing to do remains. Thus, there are different paths to the same goal, suited to different aspirants. The body witness has mastered quietude, but has only partial detachment. One who has attained to view has not mastered quietude, but has partly developed detachment, as well as an intellectual understanding of the teaching. The one attained by faith has not mastered quietude, but has partly developed detachment, and he has developed complete faith in the Buddha. The Dharma follower has not mastered quietude or detachment, but he accepts the teaching intellectually and has acquired the 5 faculties of an Arhant, namely faith, energy, clear awareness, concentration, and wisdom, but only somewhat. Finally, the faith follower has not mastered quietude or detachment, but has complete faith in the Buddha and has somewhat developed the 5 faculties. All these types of human being can reach enlightenment in this life, but not necessarily without further cultivation. When one considers these classifications, one sees how deeply karmic the Buddha's fundamental understanding is. Human beings are caught in a mirage, characterized by vast cycles of time and inevitable, infinitely proliferating causality, entropy, and negentropy, driven by the real force of moral causality that is in turn actuated by intention based on ignorance and desirous attachment in an endless series of apparent existences that have no discernible beginning or end, characterized by selflessness, change, and suffering. However, human beings also have the innate capacity, through the quality of sentience, to wake up, to see the reality of their existence. Through the perfection of non intention resulting from the cultivation of insight and tranquility, one can nullify moral causality, resulting in emancipation from the mirage and the attainment of perfect wisdom and bliss in an ultimately immortal state that is beyond rational comprehension and transdual. Non intention itself is transdual because it is not rooted in desire or revulsion being just another sort of attachment. Non intention is a state of perfect clarity of mind without attachment to the dichotomies of thought, perception, or experience. The Buddhist path bases itself on the essential idea of universal and individual causation. Moral causality acts both as a glue and an energy that binds all together yet is essentially mysterious. Moral causality equates to volition in its primary ignorant state. Moral causality is neither good nor bad. The same force that binds us is also the force that frees us. As the Havajra Tantra says, quote, one rises by that by which one falls, quote unquote. It is the essential dynamic of reality itself. Without this ultimate and essential dynamic, there would be neither becoming nor liberation, but simply the stasis of nothingness in the ordinary sense. Four kinds of persons. With respect to the goal, the Buddha further identifies four kinds of persons: those who attain emancipation through volitional exertion, and those who attain it without volitional exertion, either during life or at death. Volitional exertion includes contemplating the unattractiveness of the body, change, perceiving the repulsiveness of food, discontent with the world, and strong awareness of death. This is the classical model of the renunciate or ascetic. Attaining emancipation without volitional exertion includes seclusion from sensual pleasures and unwholesome states, and the mastery of tranquility meditation and the four meditative attainments. All these types of people must also cultivate the five powers of a trainee, namely faith, shame, fear of wrongdoing, energy, and wisdom, and the five faculties of faith, energy, clear awareness, concentration, and wisdom. The eight jhanas. One develops the renunciation of the five lower fetters, namely self view, doubt, attachment to rites and rituals, attachment and anger, equivalent to the stage of the non returner, by means of the four meditative attainments, the jhanas. One attains the first meditative attainment by giving up possessiveness, unwholesome states, and tranquilizing the bodily inertia, quote unquote. It is a cognitive state associated with rapture, happiness, and seclusion. He experiences existence as changeable, suffering, and empty of self. He turns his mind to the deathless element, quote unquote, emancipation, either experiencing the destruction of the taints or, if there is any attachment left, being reborn in the pure abodes. Thus, he experiences the stage of a non returner. With the subsiding of thought and examination, he experiences the second meditative attainment. With the fading away of rapture, he experiences the third meditative attainment. With the subsiding of pleasure and pain, he experiences the fourth meditative attainment. He experiences clear awareness and equanimity. Upon the passing away of the perception of form and sensation, he realizes the first formless meditative attainment called infinite space. Upon transcending the perception of infinite space, he realizes infinite consciousness. This is the second formless meditative attainment. Upon transcending infinite consciousness, he realizes nothingness. This is the third formless meditative attainment. Dying consciously. The Buddha also taught the practice of yoga in conjunction with the process of dying. Dying consciously can be a powerful spiritual practice. When the lay follower Digavu was dying, he asked his father Jotika to bring the Buddha. The Buddha came to Digavu to offer him spiritual guidance. Once the Buddha confirmed Digavu was dying, he advised Digavu to cultivate faith of the Buddha, the teaching, and the order. That the Buddha directed this advice to Digavu's rebirth is clear because of the Buddha's recommendation that Digavu resolve to cultivate the moral virtues. Clearly, not a recommendation that has much to do with someone who is in the final stages of life. These four factors are the standard list for stream entry. The Buddha is clearly encouraging Digavu to become a stream enterer, either in this life or the next. When Digavu affirms he has already attained stream entry, the Buddha recommends he cultivate six additional factors, namely the progressive realization of change, suffering, selflessness, renunciation, fading away, quote unquote, and cessation. Digavu declares that he has already mastered these meditations too. By means of these meditations, the Buddha declares that Digavu has achieved the stage of non returning. He has overcome the five fetters and been born in a spiritual world. One can influence one's future rebirths through will or intention. It also suggests that the stage of dying itself is a valuable opportunity to develop the spiritual life. This view is greatly developed in the Tibetan system of the transference of consciousness, quote unquote, the Po, based on the cultivation of the post-mortem state. It also shows, through the cultivation of the six things that partake of true knowledge, how one may overcome the five fetters and attain the state of a non-returner. Once again, wisdom takes priority in the practice of cultivation. And I'll also point out, in connection with that anecdote, that it is quite clear that the Buddha did not know Digavu's spiritual state when he interviewed him. Thus, he had to go through a series of recommendations at each stage of which Digavu assured the Buddha that he had attained that stage. So the Buddha didn't know what state of attainment the Digavu was at, which implies that he was a human being and that he did not have the faculty of clairvoyance, as is claimed sometimes. Seven factors of enlightenment. The Buddha identifies seven factors of enlightenment attained by five kinds of non returners, including one who attains arhantship early in this life, at death, in the interval, quote unquote, upon landing, quote unquote, without volitional exertion, with volitional exertion, or finally in the highest pure abode. This passage is exceptionally interesting, especially the references to attaining arhantship in the interval, upon landing, and becoming when bound upstream, quote unquote. According to the Orthodox Theravada interpretation, based on commentaries written hundreds of years later, these refer to emancipation attained at death, upon rebirth as a divine being, or during one's lifespan in the pure abodes. This interpretation ignores both the meaning of the terms and the order. Even Bhikkhu Bodhi, the uh, noted Pali translator, recognizes the artificiality of this interpretation on purely linguistic grounds. Both Bodhi and Dr. Peter Macefield take the obvious meaning of this passage, based also on the famous simile of the flaming chip in the Anguttara Nikaya, to refer to the current life, the moment of dying, the post-mortem state in between this life and the next rebirth, rebirth in the pure abodes, or finally during one's life after having passed through the five pure abodes, with and without volitional exertion, has thus become the two modes of attainment that apply to subsequent rebirths. Bodhi's interpretation is clearly the obvious meaning. However, it presents a grave problem for Theravadins. They deny the reality of an intermediate post-mortem state, believing rather that rebirth occurs instantaneously at death. Bhikkhu Bodhi's support for this interpretation is even more remarkable for this reason. As an aside, Bodhi himself does seem to have changed his allegiances somewhat. He has left Sri Lanka and taken up residence in the Bodhi Monastery in New Jersey. Bodhi Monastery is a Chinese Mahayana monastery with a strong basis in the Pali discourses, very much along the lines I have taken in these talks. Apparently, Bodhi himself now teaches the Mahayana interpretation of the discourses in his classes, in addition to the Theravada view. In addition to recognizing the reality of an intermediate post-mortem state, Bodhi refers to the superiority of the path of the Bodhisattva. The post-mortem state is described in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. The yoga of conscious dying bases itself on the teachings of the second Buddha, Padmasambhava. Padmasambhava recognized the reality of an intermediate post-mortem state called the interval or the in-between, Tibetan bardo. The Tibetan Book of the Dead develops an elaborate phenomenology and yoga of the intermediate state. The Tibetan Book of the Dead bases it on the vital significance of the moment of death. Finding this doctrine in the Pali Canon shows the degree to which the later Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions depend on a deep appreciation of the Pali discourses. The interval falls outside the ontological classification of the 31 planes of existence. Nevertheless, it is also a state from and within which one can attain emancipation. Tibetan Buddhism, Yogacara, and Pure Land seem to be the main schools that preserve this Pali doctrine. When the Venerable Khemaka is dying, he declares he has overcome the five aggregates subject to attachment, including ego identification with the five aggregates. But he has not yet overcome the notion or conceit of a self. Thus, he makes a distinction between self and self identity. Bodhi explains this as a residual conceit and desire associated with the odor of subjectivity, quote unquote, based on the metaphor of the flower's scent, connected with the belief in personal identity. The self does not identify self with any form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, or consciousness. I would explain it as an underlying belief in separation resulting from fundamental ignorance, still not overcome. Its root is the metaphysical underpinning of the delusion of self, detached from identification with objects, but not from exclusive self identity. The exclusivity of a self is distinct from the idea of the mind stream. The mind stream is a true self, not exclusive of anything and thus transdual. I regard the latter as the ontological underpinning of the illusory self, still mired in ignorance. One can reconcile the doctrine of selflessness with the idea of a mind stream. It is necessary if one is to regard the world as a mirage and not merely a non existent illusion. Even an illusion is ontological. The Buddha and the Arhant. Non attachment liberates both the Buddha and an Arhant. Their essential identity raises the question of the difference between them. The Buddha is self realized. The wisdom resulting from the teaching discovered and taught by the Buddha liberates the Arhant. In other words, it is a matter of seniority. Thus, the Buddha says, quote, So long as a Tathagata has not arisen in the world, an Arhant, a perfectly enlightened one, for just so long there is no manifestation of great light and radiance. But then blinding darkness prevails, a dense mass of darkness. For just so long there is no explaining, teaching, proclaiming, establishing, disclosing, analyzing, or elucidating of the Four Noble Truths. But when a Tathagata arises in the world, an Arhant, a perfectly enlightened one, then there is the manifestation of great light and radiance. Then no blinding darkness prevails, no dense mass of darkness. Then there is the explaining, teaching, proclaiming, establishing, disclosing, analyzing, and elucidating of the Four Noble Truths, quote unquote. In other words, time and history are intrinsically entropic, whereas the power of the truth of the teaching is inherently negentropic. The Buddha identifies 10 powers of the Arhat and 10 powers of the Buddha. I present these in a table, which you can find on the website at palisuttas.com. That's PALISUTTAS.com. You can search for the title of this talk there and find the table. I will read them through quickly. I won't be explaining all of them. So the 10 powers of an Arhat are impermanence, craving and suffering, seclusion and renunciation, 4 establishments of a mindfulness, 4 perfect kinds of striving, 4 bases of spiritual power, 5 spiritual faculties, 5 powers of an aspirant, 7 factors of enlightenment, and the Noble Eightfold Path. And the 10 powers of a Buddha are listed as possibility and impossibility, results of actions, ways leading everywhere, elements of the world, inclinations of beings, disposition of beings, process of emancipation and attainment, recalling past lives, the divine I or karmic destinations, and emancipation or destruction of the taints. The 4 establishments of awareness consist of contemplating the body, contemplating feelings, contemplating mind, contemplating phenomena. The 4 perfect kinds of aspiration are non arising, abandonment, arising, maintenance, or right effort. The 4 foundations of spiritual power are intention, effort, consciousness, and investigation. The 5 spiritual faculties are faith, energy, awareness, concentration, and wisdom. The 5 powers of an aspirant are faith, shame, fear of wrongdoing, energy, and wisdom. And the 7 factors of enlightenment are awareness, discrimination, energy, rapture, tranquility, concentration, and equanimity. And of course, the Noble Eightfold Path consists of right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right awareness, and right concentration. There is a rough correspondence between these terms. Nonetheless, they are not simply identical or equivalent. An essential difference is that all the powers of an arhat are primarily mental powers or realizations pertaining to the attainment of emancipation. These include various realizations concerning the nature of existence, change, attachment, suffering, etc. However, the 10 powers of a Buddha are primarily ontological. A significant number of these powers are associated with moral causality, namely knowing what is possible and impossible, causes and possibilities, the types of conduct and future destinies to which they lead, including emancipation, the inclinations and dispositions of beings, amounting to a kind of clairvoyance, recalling past lives, and seeing the causal destinies of beings, the so called divine I. The emancipation of an arhat appears to be exclusive of the world. The emancipation of the Buddha includes all this plus a deep understanding of the world, and not only from the perspective of the absolute. In the Tibetan view, the Buddha continues to be involved with the world. For example, the great 8th century adept Padmasambhava, who is credited with the conversion of the Tibetan nation to Buddhism, is held to be an emanation of the historical Buddha and enlightened at birth. I suspect this comes about because of the difference between the path of the four stages of an Arhant compared with the path of a Bodhisattva in relation to the world. That is, the Arhant renounces the world, whereas the Bodhisattva chooses to remain involved with the world for a long time, for the sake of the salvation of all beings. Thus, the realization of an Arhant excludes the world. A Buddha includes it in a way that the Arhant cannot, including what one can only call psychic powers. Rooted in the attainment of an Arhant, the attainment of a Buddha transcends that of an Arhant, not only in relation to time, but also in terms of the quality of his realization of moral causality and the nature of experience. This is characterized by the perfect awakening, detachment, and integrity of a Tathagata, whose speech and actions are in perfect accord with each other and with reality itself. The attainment of a Tathagata is also much rarer than the attainment of an Arhant, by what one can only describe as an astronomical order of magnitude. Thus, the realization of a Buddha encompasses the realization of an Arhant, but the realization of an Arhant does not encompass the realization of a Buddha. All right. Thank you very much for your attention. That does conclude the introductory series of talks on Buddha Dharma entitled Fundamental View. I will be continuing the series of Dharma talks next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I also teach these same talks on Saturday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time online. And I also present a practice, a guided meditation practice on Guru Yoga on Monday at 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time, which is 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Mondays, um, every Monday as well. So let's conclude, and also online. So let's conclude with the dedication of merit, whereby we dedicate the merit of this talk to all beings. Please feel free to join me in this. According to the Buddha, based on the law of cause and effect, everything one thinks, says, and does has a result. Every result is in turn a cause of further results in an infinitely interconnected network of cause and effect. The Dharma itself is especially efficacious. It creates beneficial results wherever it spreads. This effectiveness is the power of truth. A common term for this effect is merit. Most of the merit of teaching or even talking about Dharma returns not only to the speaker, but also to the listeners. The dedication of merit establishes the intention to sacrifice the merit that one receives in favor of others. The dedication of merit is an act of generosity. Generosity itself is karmically efficacious and thus generates more merit. By redirecting the merit that one receives to others, the dedication of merit acts like an amplifier, redirecting ever greater merit to others. Thus, one becomes an agent of ever increasing merit. The dedication of merit causes the merit of the Dharma to spread exponentially through the whole system. By the merit of this talk, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. Namaskar. Thank you, as always, for this opportunity to discuss Dharma. It is, as always, my pleasure and privilege, and I hope to see you again next Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time here on YouTube. Namaskar.